Let's start with David Cameron. What do you make of him winning or becoming Britain's new PM?
Yeah, I think it's obviously great, great news for the Conservatives. I think 15 years of rule is long for any party, and I think as the people have spoken, and I think it wasn't a landslide victory by any means. I think it's great news for his party, and let's hope they're going to make changes to Britain. He certainly doesn't take over a system which is easy to run. It's emerging from a recession. He's coming with a fairly low base. So anything that he does potentially over the next 4 to 5 years, could potentially look pretty good in the UK.
Well, many analysts are hoping that he will bring down lending. What are the hopes for that?
Yeah, I suppose, this is a European problem. This is not necessarily just a British problem, You've got full employment in most of those countries, in the sense that, your unemployment numbers run at about 5 or 6% when they run really, really hot. So, if you're running at full employment, how are you going to get your taxes up? How are you going to try and increase taxes so you could try and pay off lending at some point? And that's obviously, part and parcel of where Europe is at the moment, and the UK obviously forms part of that. So the question really, at the end of the day, is how do they reduce this to a manageable portion and then continue to grow their economies within this full employment type situation? The situation in Africa and in other emerging markets are obviously completely different to what you're finding in Europe.
Yeah, well, everything remains to be seen there. What do you make of the formation between the Lib and the Con alliance? How exactly are markets going to react to that?
Look, they don't have any other option. It wasn't a landslide victory. So at the end of the day, this is kind of, this balance of power that they've got going at this stage is really the only outcome. Look, markets, I think, in emerging markets act very differently to political instability or political wrangling than they do, for instance, in G7 type countries or developed type countries. Developed type countries really have a very strong constitution. They've got a very long history of political stability, and the markets usually detach themselves from political type decisions. What we saw last week, where we saw the market sitting down on the back end of Greek woes, and then it just, where the fire really just got fueled by not really having a decisive outcome. That was really a once-off type thing. Usually markets detach themselves from political decisions, and I'm talking about if you look at slightly longer term numbers.
Yeah. Do you think Britain's happy to see the back of Gordon Brown?
I don't know. I think the British had mixed feelings about Gordon Brown. You talk to some people and they thought he was fantastic. I mean, certainly he made his mark as far as in the Exchequer. He made his mark quite visibly there, and I think he was great in that role. I think he took over a fairly difficult British economy. He took an economy that was imploding really, and that they had to.
And the recession happened.
And the recession happened, and all that.
Words,
and all of that, obviously ends up. It's far easier being a president when everything is rosy or when things are expanding.
And when you're not coming off such a low base, like you mentioned.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Well, what top stories are you looking at?
Well, look, I mean, I think the big thing that's driving markets at the moment. I mean, we've just come off a massive sell-off internationally, and obviously this was something that was bound to happen. I've always been talking about the fact that from a multiple perspective, from a valuation perspective, we've had markets that have run up quite significantly, and on the back end of these markets running up quite significantly, we were going to see some form of fallback from there, and we've seen that happen. Nasdaq. If you look up, to last week Friday, market was down 10%, for the week. Dow Jones down 5.7%, S&P 500 down 6.5%. So we've had that cooling down period now, and we've seen markets, reverberate quite strongly. On the first day after the European bailout package was announced, and then it's kind of consolidated at this level now. It'll be quite interesting to see what happens to markets from this point forward. Multiples, certainly in the emerging markets, are quite high and continue to be quite high, and we need to start seeing earnings coming through in order to substantiate that.
Why is the US keeping such a low profile of the European debt crisis?
Well, firstly, I think, go back 12 months. We weren't talking about a European crisis at that stage. We were talking about an American crisis. And at that stage, we were talking about the American currency. A lot of commentators were talking about the American currency no longer becoming the reserve currency for the globe, but potentially looking at the euro. And it's strange to see that in 12 months' time, how things have turned around. And suddenly we're not talking so much about America anymore. We're now talking about Europe and the woes that we're seeing inside Europe. Remember that America are trying to firstly deal with their issues, which are fairly large. relative to what is happening in Europe at the moment. Remember, we're talking about business debt in the US. Yes, from a federal perspective, there is debt, but a lot of that has been brought back into line, and they're trying to bring more of that back into line. The Americans have gone quiet predominantly because European problems aren't necessarily American problems, number one, so they don't really comment on those. Secondly, much of what happens in the US at the moment, as far as funding into Europe is concerned, it happens either through capital markets, and they do continue to take on Greek debt. And thirdly, much of the funding that will happen from federal level happens through the IMF in any case, because they're part of the International Monetary Fund.
Yeah. But what are the ramifications of all this for the US banking system right now?
Well, I think the US banking system has continued to be refloated. I think the TARP program, if you look at the Toxic Asset Relief Program, it was put into effect really 12 months ago in order to save the system. I think that's being repaid as we speak. And I think the American system at some point will start refloating itself again. The real question, though, is, and if you look at it from a philosophical perspective, is they can't continue to be a country of consumers. They have to now become a country of producers, or a country of technology innovators, which is something that they have to figure out for themselves. The real issue, though, at the moment is Europe. And what happens with Europe, with the very strict labour laws that are in place, the full employment, the very big and vast social benefits, and that within a system which is really running very, very high debt to GDP ratios. And how do they grow that, and how do they continue to pay off that debt? Because the European situation really is, they're literally just pushing the benchmark out for far longer in trying to stem a crisis.